Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
From the turret of his tank, General Shafiq Fayyada addressed the citizens of Aleppo in 1980. The commander of the Syrian army's 3rd Division declared he was prepared to kill, I quote, 1,000 people a day to rid the city of the Muslim Brotherhood. Early the previous year, Muslim Brotherhood-linked terrorists had begun a war on the regime, murdering government functionaries, members of religious minorities, and even Sunni religious leaders like the head of Aleppo's Grand Mosque, Sheikh Mohammed al-Shami. Full-scale urban warfare followed the next year, with General Fayyada's soldiers washing the streets in blood. Every infidel would be killed, the Jihadists proclaimed. To protect the Republic, the Socialist Baath Party regime replied, it was, I quote, willing to fight 100 wars and sacrifice 1,000,000 martyrs. Both sides meant it. Last week, members of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or Commission for the Liberation of the Levant, brushed aside the army's 46th Regiment and captured Aleppo for the second time. They've now taken over the country's second city, Hama. The jihadist triumph could have global consequences. Even though Tahrir al-Sham has been marketing itself as a post-jihadist organization committed to combating transnational Islam, video has surfaced showing Uzbek, Chechen, and even Pakistani Urdu-speaking terrorists embedded among its ranks. Emerging from inside al-Qaeda's branch in the Levant, Jabhat al-Nusra, Tahrir al-Shams has publicly celebrated the victory of the Islamic Emirate regime in Afghanistan. Forcible conversion of minorities like the Druze and the confiscation of Christian-owned properties has been widespread. The organization, United Nations Human Rights Investigators have said, has, and I quote, committed torture and cruel treatment which may amount to war crimes. 4 years after President Donald Trump proclaimed he had crushed the Islamic State, a jihadist territorial entity is rising again. This incarnation is just one of many the Islamist movement in Syria has birthed over a century. Israel, Iran, Turkey, the United States, and Russia have all fed this crisis in turn, but its consequences will reach far beyond these powers. Lit up by the morning sun, the bodies languidly floated down the Quake River. Each victim, investigators would later discover, had been gagged with duct tape, their hands bound with plastic ties, before being neatly shot through the back of the head. In 2012, as the so-called Arab Spring erupted in Syria, a plethora of Islamist-leaning groups evicted President Bashar al-Assad's government from the east bank of the Quake. Led by Brigadier Ali Milheim, the country's military intelligence units in Aleppo savagely hit back. At least 230 people, carpenters, tailors, teachers, were tortured for information before being tossed into the river. This brutal war in Syria's cities didn't begin, as we sometimes imagine, with the Arab Spring. Early in 1924, 100 years ago, what was then the French colonial city of Hama saw its first communal violence, pitting its Sunni community against Christians. The crisis was precipitated, historian N.E. Nakli has recorded, by an influx of Christians, many of them refugees from ethnic cleansing in Turkey, as well as an influx of laborers from the Alawi minority. Even though just a single Sunni was killed in the riots, it consolidated communal fault lines. Tomorrow we'll massacre the treasonous Christians, Sunni-affiliated newspapers proclaimed according to Nakli's book. Any Muslim who opens his shop tomorrow will also pay with his blood. After the riots, anti-French resistance hardened among the Sunnis. Fazi al-Kawuki, a Lebanon-born Arab nationalist, led a rebellion in 1925. Lower-ranking Sunni clerics founded the parallel Hezbollah militia, espousing fundamentalist religious principles. French forces easily crushed the rebels, but the foundations for a longer crisis had been laid. Fin de siècle Syria saw the growth of networks like Al-Ghara or the Noble Society, which used Islamic populism as a tool of mobilization against colonial rule. The bodies of women, interestingly, became an especially volatile battleground, historian Raphael Lefebvre has written in his book Ashes of Hama. Al-Ghara organized mass protests in 1942 after women from some elite Francophile Damascus families attended a theatrical show. The group demanded all women be compelled to wear the hijab and excluded from attending cinema or theatre. Founded in 1928 in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood was to give ideological structure and discipline to this Islamic populism. Led by the charismatic Hassan al-Banna, the Brotherhood argued that Muslims needed to regain the purity of the faith to challenge colonial domination. These ideas profoundly influenced two Syrian students of Islam in Egypt, Mustafa al-Sibai and Muhammad al-Hamid. The two men began to set up units of the Brotherhood in Syria when they returned home in 1936, bringing together what was until then a very scattered fundamentalist movement. In the early decades of independent Syria, the Brotherhood competed for influence with the powerful left-leaning Arab nationalist movement. Al-Sibai began espousing the idea of Islamic socialism to try and eat into this socialist constituency. According to Lefebvre, Muhammad al-Mubarak, one of the key figures in the Brotherhood, was dismissive of this Islamic socialism, calling it, I quote, a Muslim drink in a Marxist cup. Early in 1963, a military coup brought the Arab nationalist Ba'ath Party to power. The Brotherhood found itself in opposition to the secularizing new order. The following year, Lefebvre notes, prayer leaders in Hama began preaching against the Ba'ath regime, igniting brutal clashes in which the city's largest mosque was completely destroyed. Fighters led by the Islamist commander Marwan Hadid surrendered after a month of warfare and only following the resignation of junta chief General Amin al-Hafiz. Arab nationalism proved resilient though. The new constitution, authored under Hafiz al-Assad's rule in 1973, removed Islam as the state religion. Land was confiscated to set up cooperatives and factories, a move that targeted the traditional Sunni base of the Brotherhood in the agricultural powerhouses of the Hama Homs belt as well as the Aleppo region. Even though an influential section of the Brotherhood counseled restraint, young radicals in its ranks initiated an armed revolt against the government. Led by the jihadists Adnan Ukla and Ibrahim al-Yusuf, what was called the Fighting Vanguard would conduct a series of savage killings. The summer of 1979 saw the slaughter of 83 military cadets, mainly Alawi, in Aleppo. Figures linked to the Ba'ath Party as well as their family were murdered, leading up to General Fayyada's brutal crackdown on Aleppo. Thousands were killed in the regime's brutal war of extermination against the Islamists. Large swathes of the old city of Hama were leveled by the military, a carnage that still scars Syria's political imagination today. Following the crushing of the Hama Jihad, large numbers of Islamist leaders fled the country. Among them was Aleppo-born Mustafa Nasser. London, where journalist Abdul Bari Atwan has written, the United Kingdom's intelligence services provided safe haven to many jihadists seen as allies against the Soviet Union, provided a welcoming home. Later, Nasser moved to Afghanistan, becoming a trusted aide of al-Qaeda's founding chief, Osama bin Laden. The Syrian jihadists, with their long combat experience, formed al-Qaeda's hard core. Ahmad Hussein al-Shara, better known by the pseudonym today Abu Muhammad al-Julan, was among a younger generation of jihadists who occupied center stage as Al Qaeda returned to Iraq after 2003. The son of an oil engineer who fled Hafiz al Assad's Syria for Saudi Arabia, al Shara emerged as a key leader of Al Qaeda in Iraq. He was captured by United States troops in 2006 and spent several years in the notorious Abu Ghraib prison before being repatriated to Syria. Flailing in the face of the terror threat from Al Qaeda's presence in Iraq, President Bashar al Assad, who's Hafiz al Assad's son and successor, sought to buy peace with the jihadists. Al Shara was among many jihadists and political Islamists released by the government in 2011. They went on to form Al Qaeda's chapter in Syria, Al Nusra. Al Nusra was pretty much defeated by 2016, though, under the weight of attacks by Syria's allies, Iran and Russia. Al Shara retreated to his last bastion, the area of Idlib on the border with Turkey, and began rebranding his movement as a locally focused Islamic organization that was certainly committed to religious law but opposed to transnational terrorism. Although the Tahrir al-Sham retained elements of Al Qaeda among its ranks, researcher Aaron Zellin has observed, it cooperated with Western counter-terrorism operations against the Islamic State and Al Qaeda. Even as Iran's forces in Syria came under attack and Russia's military presence withered because of the war in Ukraine, Tahrir al-Sham and its Turkish backers saw an opportunity. Turkish and Western intelligence services were drawn to the organization because they saw it as a useful tool not only to fight Al Qaeda and the Islamic State, but also to undermine Bashar al Assad's government. As scholars Rahaf al Dugli and Azam al Qasir note, efforts to rehabilitate Tahrir al Sham, I quote, seem to suffer from a kind of cognitive convulsion that sometimes appear when evaluating the label terrorist in relation to Western security needs. The problem, they say, is that those backing Tahrir al-Sham are worried only about terrorists who target them, not the fate of those who have to live under their rule. The long war in Syria is on the cusp of yielding a jihadist safe haven yet again. Even if Tahrir al-Sham's proto-state continues to contain transnational terrorism, it is certainly to be an incubator of the violent ideas that have shown they can reach far beyond borders. That may be a price some in the West think is worth paying, but it's a course of action fraught with danger for the rest of the world. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.